The dying light of 1,000 stars flickered beyond the shattered heavens, their glow fading like whispered prayers lost in the void. Cadia, the eternal fortress world, stood as a monument to defiance, yet now, beneath swollen warp storms and a sky bruised with war, it crumbled, inch by tortuous inch. The great bastions that had withstood the relentless tides of chaos for 10 millennia groaned under the weight of an enemy unseen but all-consuming. This was the end, the slow unraveling of a symbol that once burned bright with hope. Before we begin this story, know this: we truly love and care for you. Wherever you watch from, whatever time it is in your corner of the universe, we invite you now. Grab your coffee, settle your mind, and walk with us through the twilight of a fallen empire. Let us begin. The sound was subtle. A low resonance carried across the vast command chamber deep beneath Casa Prosec. It was not the blare of alarms or the desperate cries of the dying, but something far older, a tremor in the bones of the world itself, like the slow cracking of stone under unbearable pressure. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen stood at the obsidian window, watching the storm-ridden skies above Cadia's scarred surface. The swirling tempest was more than a natural phenomenon. It was a warp rift, a bleeding wound in reality that heralded ruin. For centuries, Alaric had held vigil here, a sentinel immortal, forged by ancient gene weapons and arcane resurrection protocols from a darker age long buried beneath layers of imperial dogma. His face, timeless and etched with the weight of countless battles, betrayed no hint of the turmoil within. Yet his eyes, those ancient, jade-colored eyes, burned with a quiet despair. He had watched legions rise and fall, worlds consumed in fire, but nothing had prepared him for the agony of this moment, the slow death of Cadia, the last bastion against the endless night. The galaxy had shifted beneath his feet. Empires rose like titans and fell like dust. Immortality, once a blessing, now seemed a curse, chaining him to a fate of endless loss. His mind replayed the faces of those who had fought beside him, comrades, brothers, and sisters in arms, now vanished like ghosts. And yet, here he remained, the last unyielding link to a time before the fall. Across the chamber, the hololith flickered, revealing fractured images of the approaching enemy, the twisted shapes of the Chaos Legions, their numbers uncountable, and the ceaseless storm of warp energy tearing at Cadia's defenses. The Imperium's greatest weapon would soon be tested, yet no reinforcements were coming. The transmission from Terra was cold and unyielding. Hold the line. No retreat. No surrender. Sacrifice everything. Alaric's fingers clenched at the edge of the obsidian frame. The words echoed in his mind, a cruel command from distant masters who viewed Cadia as a mere pawn. To them, this was a strategic delay, a moment bought with countless lives. To him, it was a slow massacre, the killing of a home, a people, a hope. Inside his chest, something broke. Not the unyielding armor of command, but the fragile ember of doubt. Was loyalty to the Imperium worth the price of his people's extinction? Was obedience to the Emperor's will a virtue, or a chain forged in cold calculation? He turned away from the shattered stars outside to face the council gathered before him. Faces worn with exhaustion and fear. Eyes haunted by the knowledge that this might be their final day. Among them, Colonel Serene Thale, a mortal woman whose fierce spirit had become the heartbeat of Cadia's resistance. Unlike Alaric, she bore no gifts of immortality, only fierce determination. Her presence reminded him of the fragility of life and the price of endless war. "We are the shield of humanity," Alaric said, his voice a low rumble. "If we falter, the warp storms will sweep across the Imperium's heart. This is our burden." Serane's eyes met his, unflinching. "But for how long? We bleed them dry, and they send no aid. If Terra's orders mean sacrifice, then what remains for us when all is gone?" The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered. As the council debated, Alaric's mind wandered back to the ancient texts buried beneath Casa Prosek, whispered legends of a weapon forged before the Emperor's light, a power capable of turning the tide. If only it could be unearthed. But such power came at a cost no living soul dared speak aloud. Outside, the warp storm intensified, the rift tearing open like a jagged wound in the fabric of the galaxy. Cadia was falling, and with it, the last flicker of hope against the encroaching darkness. Alaric's heart, immortal yet burdened with the weight of countless centuries, tightened as he contemplated the impossible choice before him: to hold the line and watch his world die, or to seek salvation in shadows darker than the warp itself. The stars outside began to fade, one by one, as if the very universe mourned the impending loss. The heavy silence in the command chamber was broken only by the faint hum of ancient machinery and the soft footsteps of those who lingered behind the great obsidian window. The stars beyond remained cloaked in tumultuous darkness, the warp storms overhead still raging like a tempest, refusing to be quelled. But inside Casa Prosek, another battle was being waged, quieter, more insidious, and far more human. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen stood motionless, the weight of eternity pressing down upon his shoulders. He clutched a small crystalline shard, no larger than a man's fingernail, in his hand. One of many memory crystals he had kept secret for centuries. Within its depths swirled the fading echoes of voices, the last moments of comrades whose flesh had long since turned to dust. These shards were all that remained of the brothers and sisters he had led to countless victories and devastating defeats. Each one was a fragment of his past, a painful reminder of everything lost. His lips moved in a silent prayer, though he was unsure if any god still listened. From behind him came a measured step. Colonel Serene Thale approached, her face hard yet weary, etched with the lines of countless sleepless nights. Unlike Alaric, she was mortal, her flesh fragile and fleeting, marked by time and suffering. But her eyes burned with fierce determination, the indomitable spark that had kept Cadia's defenders standing when all seemed lost. "You still hold on to those relics," she said quietly, nodding toward the memory crystal in his hand. "Haunted by ghosts, Castellan." Alaric did not respond immediately. Instead, he let the shard catch the faint light, revealing faint images of soldiers, young, hopeful, long dead. "They remind me of what we fight for," he said finally, "and what we have already lost." Serene frowned, stepping closer. "Lost to the Emperor's war, or lost to those who command it from afar. You know what the others whisper, that Terra sees us only as expendable, a buffer between the Imperium's heart and the encroaching darkness." The bitterness in her voice was sharp and undeniable. It was a truth many dared not speak aloud, but all felt in the marrow of their bones. Cadia was a fortress, yes, but it was also a pawn, a sacrifice. Alaric sighed, turning away to gaze once more at the storm-scarred world beneath them. "I have served the Imperium longer than most can remember. Loyalty is all I have left. But even I wonder if that loyalty is a chain or a shield." A sudden flicker on the hololith drew their attention. A coded transmission blinked into existence, intercepted whispers from within the High Command. The message was terse, shrouded in bureaucratic coldness. Priority orders. Maintain siege. No reinforcement. Prepare for evacuation protocols if necessary. Serane's eyes narrowed. They're preparing to abandon us. Alaric's jaw clenched. The words settled in his chest like a lead weight. If they abandon Cadia, the warp will spill forth like a flood. Entire sectors will burn. A long silence stretched between them. "Have you thought," Serane began, voice barely above a whisper, "that maybe it's already too late? That we fight not for survival, but for the illusion of hope?" Alaric closed his eyes. The centuries had dulled neither his senses nor his doubts. Immortality was a heavy burden. The endless cycle of witnessing the rise and fall of countless heroes. The endless repetition of war and betrayal. He had lived through ages when gods walked among men, when empires rose from the ashes of stars, and when those empires shattered like glass. Each time, the same question haunted him. What was the price of survival? And what was the cost of surrender? "Perhaps," he said slowly, "our greatest enemy is not the Chaos Legions without, but the rot within." Serane's gaze softened, though no less urgent. "Then we must root it out before it consumes us." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger. A young officer, trembling with fatigue and fear. He handed Alaric a sealed datapad, its seal bearing the mark of the High Lords of Terror. The Castellan's eyes darkened as he broke the seal and read the contents. "Orders from Terror," Alaric announced grimly. "Hold the line at all costs. The Imperium cannot lose Cadia." Serane's lips tightened into a thin line. Hold at all costs, meaning lives, ours, theirs, everyone's. Alaric met her gaze. "I fear costs is the price they have already decided we must pay." The days blurred into nights, and nights into endless days, as Cadia's defenders prepared for the coming storm. War machines groaned to life, and the clang of armor echoed through corridors stained with the blood of the fallen. Yet beneath the clamor of battle readiness, a deeper tension rippled, an unspoken fear that the fight was no longer just against an enemy of flesh and steel, but against the cold, indifferent machinery of imperial politics. Alaric found himself wandering the ancient halls, seeking solace in the forgotten archives of Casa Prosek. There, buried beneath layers of dust and secrecy, he discovered whispers of a weapon, a relic from before the Emperor's light, forged in an age lost to memory. This weapon was said to possess power beyond reckoning, capable of unraveling the very fabric of the warp itself. It was a tool of salvation or destruction. His thoughts returned to the present, to the faces of those who depended on him, to Serane, whose loyalty to Cadia often seemed to conflict with loyalty to the Imperium, and to the countless soldiers who looked to him for hope amid the gathering darkness. He was a man caught between worlds, immortal and yet haunted, loyal and yet betrayed. The stars beyond flickered faintly, as if weeping for a fate already sealed. As the warp storms churned overhead and the enemy closed in, Alaric knew the war was no longer just for Cadia's survival. It was for the soul of the Imperium itself, and for the fragile hope that even in the darkest night, a single spark might yet endure. In the cold stillness of the war room, Lord Castellan Alaric Valen sat alone, the flickering light of the hololith casting long shadows across his ageless features. Time had a strange way of warping here beneath Casa Prosek, where millennia passed, like moments, and moments stretched into eternity. Yet for Alaric, immortality was not a gift, but a prison. Each day he bore witness to the endless parade of death, loss, and despair. his soul growing heavier with every fallen brother. He placed the memory crystal carefully upon the table. Inside, it preserved the final moments of Captain Edrin, a young man whose laughter had once filled the barracks, but who now lay shattered beneath the rubble of Kassavar. The images played silently, a haunting requiem etched into the very essence of the shard. Alaric closed his eyes and inhaled slowly. Immortality was a cruel burden. To watch generations die, to remain untouched by time while the world crumbled beneath you. What was the price of such endless life? He wondered, not for the first time, if the gods themselves pitied him, or if he was doomed to wander forever as a relic of forgotten ages. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. Colonel Serene Thale entered, her footsteps purposeful but cautious. "You shouldn't be alone with these memories, Castellan," she said, voice steady though edged with concern. "They will consume you." Alaric opened his eyes, the weight of centuries evident in their depths. "Memories are all I have left, and yet they are also my curse." She approached and laid a hand on his arm, a fleeting touch grounding him in the present. "We must focus on the living now. The convoy from the Segmentum is overdue. Supplies should have arrived days ago." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I feared as much. Our lifeline is fraying, deliberately severed." Serene's brow furrowed. "Reports suggest the fleet has been diverted to safer sectors. The High Lords do not intend to risk their precious assets on a doomed world." The words landed like a thunderclap. The betrayal was not from the enemy without, but from those who sat upon Terra's throne. Alaric's jaw tightened. The loyalty he had sworn to the Emperor was now tangled in a web of politics and cold calculation. "I have sent envoys," Alaric replied, "but each message is met with silence or bureaucratic deflection. It is as though we are to be left to bleed out." Serene's eyes darkened with anger. "And still we fight. For what? For a dream. For an empire that views us as expendable." Alaric looked away, grappling with a truth he could not deny. "I have lived through the age of apostasy, the Dark Crusades, the endless wars that shaped humanity's destiny. I have seen empires rise and fall, and the fragile hope of peace crushed beneath the boots of ambition." She hesitated, then spoke softly. "You speak of hope as though it were a fragile thing. But what if hope is all that remains? If we lose that, what are we but ashes?" His gaze hardened. "Hope and loyalty. Yet sometimes loyalty blinds us to our own destruction." The war room's hololith sparked again, this time showing encrypted transmissions intercepted from within their own ranks. Whispers of dissent, signs of a secret faction preparing for evacuation protocols, ready to abandon Cadia when the moment came. "Internal betrayal," Serene said grimly. "The enemy within us may prove deadlier than any Chaos Legion." Alaric's thoughts turned inward. Betrayal was a poison that had coursed through history, a wound that never fully healed. How many comrades had turned on each other, driven by fear, ambition, or despair? He knew the sting intimately. "Tell me, Serene," he said quietly, "what would you do if the empire you swore to serve ordered you to surrender your home, to betray your people for a cause that no longer seemed just?" She looked him in the eyes, unflinching. "I would defy them, because Cadia is more than a world. It is the heart of those who stand against oblivion, even if it means my death." For a moment, the two shared a silence heavier than any siege. Outside, the warp storms roared, tearing at the very fabric of reality. Then Alaric spoke of a legend he had uncovered deep within the archives, a weapon forged before the Emperor's birth. a relic imbued with the power to cleave the warp itself. It was said to be buried beneath the ruins of Casamarak, forgotten by time, but not by fate. A salvation, he murmured, or a curse. Serane's eyes widened. If such a weapon exists, it could turn the tide, or doom us all. Alaric nodded. Power that ancient does not come without cost. I must decide whether to seek it, or accept the fate laid before us. The weight of his words settled like a shroud over the room. For in that moment, both knew the path forward was fraught with peril. Not just from the enemy beyond, but from the choices within. As the night deepened and the warp storms intensified, Alaric Valen faced the greatest battle of his long existence, the war within his own soul. The endless siege of Cadia deepened, its once proud bastions now scarred by relentless bombardment. Outside the massive fortified walls, the skies churned with storm and fire, a swirling maelstrom of warp energy tearing at the fragile borders between reality and oblivion. The air inside Casamarak was thick with smoke, the acrid scent of burnt promethium mixing with the cold metallic tang of blood. The clangor of war machines and the cries of the dying echoed through the fractured halls, a ceaseless dirge for a world on the edge of annihilation. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen paced the great chamber, the weight of command etched deep into his immortal features. The ancient stone beneath his boots seemed to tremble with every step, a subtle but growing tremor that mirrored the fracturing of Cadia's spirit. War was not merely an external force now. It had begun to corrode from within. Across the council table sat Colonel Serene Thale, her brow furrowed as she confronted the grim reality before them. The reports were bleak. Enemy forces had breached several outer casas, pushing inward with terrifying speed. Hundreds of thousands of Cadian defenders had fallen, their sacrifice etched into the very bedrock. But worse than the enemy's advance was the fracture spreading among their own ranks. Serene's voice was steady, but laced with bitter resolve. The High Lord's orders have become a noose. They demand we hold at all costs, but they send no reinforcements. The supply convoys are either lost or redirected. We are being bled. Dry Alaric nodded, his eyes darkening. Terror treats Cadia as a mere shield, a sacrifice to delay the enemy. Our people suffer not for glory, but as a calculated loss. The tension in the room was palpable. Council members exchanged wary glances, each carrying the weight of their own doubts. Some whispered of defiance, others of quiet resignation. But beneath it all, a storm brewed, one of mistrust and fractured loyalty. Serene leaned forward, voice low and fierce. I say we defy the orders. If Terror abandons us, then we must abandon Terror's command. We owe our loyalty first to Cadia, to the people who have given their lives for this world. Alaric's gaze was conflicted. And yet, disobedience is treason. We are bound by duty, by honor, by the oath sworn in the Emperor's name. To break that is to lose ourselves. The silence that followed was broken by a sudden transmission crackling from the hololith. Static gave way to a distorted message. Fragments of intercepted communications suggesting a faction within the Cadian command preparing evacuation plans without Imperial sanction. A shadow rebellion. Serene's eyes narrowed. Someone is already betraying us, preparing to cut and run behind our backs. Alaric's hand clenched into a fist. The enemy is not only without, it festers within. The room's atmosphere grew tense, like a blade poised to strike. Among those gathered were whispers of General Voska, Alaric's trusted second-in-command, who had been seen meeting with shadowy envoys and issuing orders independent of the Castellan's command. Alaric's mind raced. How many times in history had betrayal sown the seeds of ruin? And now, it seemed, Cadia was not spared this ancient wound. The council chamber's grand doors creaked open, revealing a messenger bearing news from the front lines. The bearer's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. The enemy has breached Casa Ordanis. Heavy casualties reported. They pushed closer to the heart of Casa Mirak. Alaric's heart tightened, but his voice remained steady. Then we must prepare for the worst. Rally what remains of the defenders. The final stand will be here. As the messenger departed, Alaric turned to Serene. There is another matter. He reached beneath his cloak and produced a tattered, ancient parchment, a fragment from the forbidden archives he had uncovered weeks earlier. On its brittle surface were etched crude schematics and arcane symbols, describing a weapon forged before the Emperor's rise, capable of devastating power. It is said to lie beneath Casa Mirak, buried in the forgotten catacombs, he said, voice heavy. A relic from a lost age, imbued with the power to rend the very fabric of the warp. Serene's eyes widened. Could it be real? Could such a weapon save us? Alaric shook his head slowly. Power such as this is a double-edged sword. The cost may be our destruction as well as theirs. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. To wield such a weapon was to gamble with the fate of Cadia itself. But with the enemy closing in and Terra's abandonment looming, what choice remained? Outside, the skies darkened further, the warp storms growing into a tempest that threatened to consume all light. Thunder rolled across the shattered landscape, the heavens themselves seeming to mourn the fall of the once great bastion. Alaric's gaze lingered on the horizon, where flashes of distant fire marked the enemy's advance. In his heart, a storm raged, torn between duty and despair, between hope and ruin. As the final light of day faded, he whispered a solemn vow to the silent stars. If Cadia must fall, then it will fall on our terms, and I will bear the burden of that choice until my last breath. The dying world trembled beneath his feet, and the shadow of betrayal loomed ever larger. The corridors of Casa Prosek were shrouded in uneasy quiet, a fragile calm that clung to the walls like dust before the storm. Outside, the thunder of war had not ceased, but within the fortress, something more subtle and sinister was unfolding. Whispers moved like shadows through the ranks, a whispered rumor that chilled the hearts of even the most stalwart defenders. An envoy had arrived, but not from the Imperium's command. The message was clear. Peace offered from the enemy, a truce veiled in temptation, wrapped in promises of salvation and eternal rest. Lord Castellan Alaric Valan stood before the great chamber doors, their heavy bulk sealed shut behind him. His immortal hands, weathered by centuries, clenched at the hilt of his ceremonial blade, the weight of impossible choices pressing down like the stone ceilings above. The envoy was unlike any foe Alaric had ever faced, not clad in armor nor bearing weapons. Instead, a figure draped in shifting shadows, their voice a melody of cold reason and dark promise. "You have fought bravely, Castellan," the envoy intoned, their words laced with a curious blend of mockery and respect. "But your war is lost. Your world will burn, your people crushed beneath the tides you cannot stem." Alaric's eyes burned with defiance, yet beneath his steely exterior, a whisper of doubt stirred. Why come here to offer peace when your legions spill blood across our lands? The envoy's smile was a jagged thing, as if teeth glinted behind shadowed lips. Because even the fiercest storm must sometimes rest. We offer you release, eternal peace, if you but open your gates and end this futile resistance. A silence stretched, heavy as the void beyond the stars. "You ask me to betray my oath, to surrender my people," Alaric replied, voice grim and unyielding. "There is no peace in betrayal." "Peace is a matter of perspective," the envoy whispered, stepping closer. "Your Imperium has already abandoned you. They treat you as cannon fodder, as a shield to buy time for their own safety." Those words struck deeper than any blade. Alaric's immortal heart faltered for a heartbeat, the weight of centuries crashing down upon him. "You serve masters who see you as expendable," the envoy continued. "Why cling to a dying dream? Why not choose rest instead of ruin?" Alaric's grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. "Because even in ruin, we are more than pawns. Cadia's defenders carry the light of humanity's hope. To surrender is to snuff that light forever." The envoy bowed mockingly. "Very well, Castellan. But know this, when your walls fall and your people perish, you will know that I offered mercy." With that, the shadowed figure dissolved into the darkness, leaving behind a void heavier than the blackest night. Alaric remained motionless, grappling with the seeds of temptation that had been planted. An impossible choice laid bare before him: to open the gates and spare countless lives, but doom his honor and his world to eternal disgrace, or to stand fast against the encroaching darkness, knowing it meant death for many, and perhaps the end of all. When Colonel Serene Thale arrived, her eyes searching his face, she found a man on the precipice of a chasm neither could fully comprehend. "They come with offers of peace," Alaric said quietly, his voice betraying a weariness that centuries could not dull. "A release from war, but at what cost?" Serene's gaze was fierce. "Cadia's defenders will never yield to shadows. But I fear this war is not only fought with weapons and men, but with whispers and poison." Alaric nodded. "The enemy does not fight fair. They strike at the heart, at the soul, and sometimes the greatest enemy is the doubt they sow within us." Together, they looked out over the shattered city, where fires burned through the night, and the cries of the wounded rose in a chorus of despair. Alaric's immortal gaze softened as he turned to Serene. "This war will test not only our strength, but our very humanity." Serene's hand found his shoulder, a steadying presence in the storm of his thoughts. "And whatever comes, we will face it as one, for Cadia, for the hope that endures." But as the night deepened and the enemy's shadow crept ever closer, the weight of impossible choices pressed down, choices that would shape the fate of worlds and the hearts of men. The storm had been brewing for days, though none aboard the Imperious Rex knew it yet. The astropaths whispered of dissonance in the immaterium, psychic feedback so intense it left their tongues numb and their minds raw. Gaius Varnek, master of the fleet, stood on the command deck, staring at the hololithic display. Warp currents swirled in impossible geometries. The charts were useless. "Navigator reports instability ahead," announced the comms officer. "He advises full halt until the tides stabilize." "No." Varnek's voice was iron. "We press forward. Every hour lost gives the heretic time to fortify." Beneath his certainty, though, a seed of unease took root. The last 3 vessels to travel this route had vanished without trace. No wreckage, no distress calls, just absence. In the lower decks, crewmen complained of nightmares that bled into waking life. Visions of a titanic, eyeless serpent wrapping around the ship, whispering in a voice older than humanity itself. Tech priests reported Auspex readings of objects that weren't there one moment and loomed kilometers wide the next. By the second day in the warp storm, the Geller field flickered. just once, just for less than a heartbeat. But in that heartbeat, screams erupted in Maintenance Corridor Delta 12. Security teams found nothing but slick trails of something. Organic. Magos Dominus Rel, his mechadendrites twitching with static, approached the bridge. "Lord Varnek," he said, Vox grill crackling. "There is an anomaly shadowing us. It is not of the materium. It hungers." They couldn't turn back. The storm closed behind them like a collapsing wound, cutting off retreat. Ahead, the currents of the warp funneled into a single point, a gaping tear in reality, swirling with violet fire. The thing in the dark was herding them toward it. The first boarding came without warning, not through the hull, but through the air itself, holes ripping open in reality, disgorging shapes made of too many limbs, too many mouths. Lasfire tore them apart, only for the pieces to slither back together. And then the whispers began, directly inside their skulls. One name, over and over. Leviathan. Varnek finally saw it, half submerged in the warp's roiling madness. A shadow so vast that even titanic Imperial battleships would be motes of dust before it. The void-born beast's tendrils stretched across light years. The Imperious Rex's engines roared at maximum, but the beast's pull was relentless. Void shields flared and buckled. Then came the impact. Not physical, but psychic. Hundreds dropped dead instantly, their minds burned out. Those who survived felt their will splinter, the thing's hunger gnawing at their very souls. Varnek gave the only order left. "All hands, prepare for exterminatus protocols. If we cannot escape, we will not be taken." The bridge shook as the void lit with plasma detonations from the ship's own self-destruct contingencies arming. But the Leviathan's tendrils coiled tighter. The Imperious Rex screamed through the warp, half matter, half madness, as reality itself began to tear. And then the Geller field failed. The explosion in the warp was unlike any recorded in Imperial annals. The Imperious Rex was swallowed whole by a nightmare older than stars themselves. When the hololiths flickered back to life, showing the shattered remnants of the fleet, Lord Castellan Alaric Valen's voice was a low growl. They were consumed by the Leviathan. The warp has claimed their souls. But while the cosmic horror devoured whole vessels and severed supply lines, the siege on Cadia raged on, relentless and brutal. The defenders were stretched thin, their spirits battered as fiercely as their walls. Amid the chaos, a new figure stepped forward, a whisper in the shadows, cloaked in secrecy and fear. General Voska, Alaric's trusted second-in-command, had grown distant, his eyes haunted and his actions furtive. Rumours spread that he had made secret pacts, deals struck in the darkness to save what little remained of Cadia. Alaric confronted him in the war room, the air thick with tension. "Voska, your loyalty is in question. What bargains have you struck?" Voska's gaze was cold but unwavering. "I do what must be done to preserve Cadia. The Imperium has abandoned us. We cannot afford idealism when survival is at stake." Betrayal hung heavy between them, not just of duty, but of soul. Voska's willingness to sacrifice honor for survival mirrored the rot spreading through their ranks. Meanwhile, Colonel Serene Thale gathered what loyal forces remained for a desperate counterattack. "We fight for more than walls and orders," she told her soldiers. "We fight for the hope of humanity." The battle was fierce, each skirmish a symphony of fire and blood. Yet even as they pushed back, the enemy unleashed a weapon beyond reckoning. Warp-tainted artillery that twisted reality and shattered minds. The cost was steep. Entire squads disappeared into madness or vaporized in psychic blasts. morale frayed like old cloth. In the depths of Casa Prosek, Alaric found himself haunted by visions. Visions of Cadia burning, its defenders broken, and a future drowned in shadow. He wrestled with his own immortality, cursed to witness the fall again and again. Is this my fate? He wondered aloud. To stand as a sentinel over ruins, bound by honor to a lost cause. Serane's voice broke his solitude. You are not alone, Castellan. Our sacrifice is not in vain. As long as we breathe, hope endures. But hope was fragile. Like the fading light of a dying star, it threatened to snuff out at any moment. As the enemy tightened their grip, Voskar's betrayal became clear. He was planning to open Cadia's gates, not to save it, but to surrender it to the darkness. Faced with this treachery, Alaric had but one choice: to fight not only the enemy without, but the traitor within. The storm outside mirrored the storm in his heart, a maelstrom of loyalty, despair, and the unyielding will to protect what little remained. Cadia's fate hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of ruin and redemption. The corridors of Casa Prosek were no longer safe havens, but corridors of whispered suspicion and cold glances. The seeds of betrayal had blossomed into open rot. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen moved through the shadows like a wraith, his every step measured, each breath heavy with the burden of impending doom. The traitor within, General Voskar, had woven a web of deceit, his agents operating in secret, to open Cadia's gates for the enemy. Alaric had known the fight was not just against the monstrous forces battering the walls, but against the darkness festering in human hearts. He found Serene Thale in the war room, poring over battle maps, her eyes bloodshot but unwavering. They're coming from within as much as without, Alaric said, his voice a low rumble. Serene's gaze lifted, fierce and resolute. We must root out the poison, no matter the cost. Their alliance had become their fortress, a fragile bastion against the chaos spreading through Cadia's veins. As the enemy breached the outer casas, Alaric called a secret council of loyal commanders. We fight not just for survival, but for the soul of Cadia. Any who betray that soul will be cast out, or worse. Voskar's treachery was laid bare when an agent of his was caught sabotaging the fortress's defenses. Torture and interrogation revealed a conspiracy to open the eastern gate at dawn. The weight of this betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Cadia's walls were meant to hold against enemies. Instead, the enemy walked among them. That night, Alaric confronted Voskar in the shadowed halls. The general's face was a mask of cold pragmatism. You are blind to the reality, Castellan, Voskar said. Cadia will fall. Better to control its fall than be crushed by it. Alaric's voice was steel. Better to die with honor than live in betrayal. The confrontation ended not with blades, but with Voskar's disappearance into the night, a ghost fleeing before the storm. With betrayal festering, the defenders prepared for the enemy's final assault. Alaric and Serene led the troops with grim determination, their resolve a beacon in the gathering darkness. The dawn broke over a battered, bloodied Cadia, the air thick with smoke and the scent of burning promethium. From the horizon, the enemy surged forward, a tide of darkness and fire. Alaric raised his sword, voice ringing out, "Hold the line, for Cadia, for the Emperor." The battle that followed was apocalyptic. Bolters roared, chainsword screamed, and psychic powers clashed in a tempest of light and shadow. The ground shook beneath the fury of Titan engines and demon fire. Amid the chaos, Alaric's mind was a tempest of conflict, between duty and doubt, loyalty and despair. The traitor's shadow loomed, but so did the stubborn hope that even in ruin, Cadia's heart would beat. As the enemy pressed in, the fortress's walls began to crumble, the line between friend and foe blurred by smoke and blood. In those moments, Alaric understood the true cost of immortality. Not the endless years, but the endless witnessing of loss, the carrying of memories that no one else could bear. Yet still, he fought. For those who could not, for those who had fallen, and for a future that might yet be born from the ashes. The ruinous night of Cadia's final defense bled into a dawn drenched in ash and sorrow. The once mighty bastion now lay fractured, its walls shattered, its banners tattered, and its defenders either fallen or scattered. Yet amid the ruins, a burning ember of defiance still flickered. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen moved through the shattered halls, each step a bitter reminder of the price paid. The echo of fallen comrades haunted every corner, their faces a silent accusation that chilled his immortal soul. The weight of survival pressed heavily upon him, not just the physical survival of his people, but the survival of their honor, their purpose. It was here, in this desolation, that the true betrayal unfolded. General Voska, the man who had once stood beside Alaric as brother in arms, revealed his final gambit. Hidden deep within the labyrinthine catacombs beneath Casa Mirac, Voska had convened with emissaries of the enemy, pledging to surrender the fortress's last defenses in exchange for mercy. When Alaric discovered this, his fury was a tempest. To betray the defenders of Cadia in their darkest hour was a sin beyond redemption. Confronting Voska in the shadowed vaults beneath the fortress, Alaric's voice was cold, the chill of centuries cutting through the air. You have chosen death, not for yourself, but for all who trusted you. Voska's eyes, once filled with the fire of conviction, now held only weary resignation. The Empire has forgotten us. We are expendable. Cannon fodder in a game we no longer control. Alaric's blade was swift. Then I choose to die with honor, and I will not allow you to drag us into oblivion. The duel was fierce but brief. Years of camaraderie twisted into bitterness, their blades clashing as the fortress crumbled around them. When it ended, Voska lay defeated, but the wound he had inflicted on Cadia's soul was deep and enduring. With the traitor unmasked and silenced, Alaric turned to face the relentless tide outside. The enemy's forces had become a storm of destruction, bolstered by warp-tainted sorcery and demon engines that defied comprehension. Yet, even as despair threatened to consume him, a whisper of hope came from the depths. The ancient weapon buried beneath Casa Mirac, a relic whispered in legend. Some saw it as salvation, others a curse waiting to be unleashed. Alaric knew the choice he faced, to awaken a power that could rend the warp itself, but at a cost that might shatter what remained of Cadia and all within. The decision weighed heavy on his immortal shoulders, a final testament to the tragic fate of a world caught between light and shadow. As the skies burned and the fortress prepared to fall, Alaric Valen raised his voice above the chaos. For Cadia, for humanity, for the hope that refuses to die. In the ruins of a dying world, the last stand was about to begin. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning promethium and ozone. Explosions rocked the shattered battlements of Casa Mirac as the last defenders of Cadia braced for the inevitable. Their numbers were few, their spirits tested beyond mortal limits, but their resolve burned bright, a flickering flame against the encroaching darkness. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen stood atop the broken parapets, his weathered armor scarred from centuries of battle. his eyes reflecting the dying light of a world on the brink. Behind him, Colonel Serene Thale marshaled the remaining forces, her voice unwavering as she urged the troops onward. The ancient weapon, long dormant beneath the fortress, was stirring. Alaric had made the choice, a desperate gamble to awaken the power that could sunder the warp and turn back the tide. Yet with each pulse of the relic's awakening, the fabric of reality trembled, threatening to unravel all that remained. The enemy's assault was relentless. Demon engines spat fire and warp energy, twisting the battlefield into a hellscape of flesh and metal. Bolter fire roared, and the cries of the dying echoed through the ruins. Alaric's thoughts flickered to the cost. The sons and daughters of Cadia, who had given everything. Their sacrifice was etched into the bones of the world, a testament to courage in the face of oblivion. The weapon's power surged, a radiant pulse that tore through the warp storms, fracturing the enemy's ranks. Yet the cost was immediate and devastating. The relic's release shattered the delicate barrier between real space and the immaterium, unleashing forces beyond comprehension. Cadia trembled. The sky fractured as though cleaved by an invisible blade. Shadows danced in unnatural forms, and the screams of the damned filled the air. Alaric realized the tragic truth. Salvation came at the price of damnation. As the ground split and the heavens wept fire, he raised his sword and cried out a final vow. Though Cadia falls, our spirit shall endure, an eternal beacon against the darkness. Around him, the defenders fought on, a desperate tide against the abyss. But even as victory flickered, the cost was clear. The weapon's power had torn open wounds in reality that might never heal. Alaric's immortal soul, bound to the fate of Cadia, accepted the price. To save the many, some must be lost, perhaps even the world itself. As the fortress crumbled and the warp storms consumed the battlefield, the last echoes of Cadia's defenders were carried away on the howling winds, a tragic goodbye to a world that refused to surrender, even in its final breath. The ruins of Cadia whispered in the void, a ghostly lament carried on winds that no longer stirred leaves, but ash. The battlefield was silent now, save for the distant echoes of the warp's dying fury and the soft, endless pulse of the ancient weapon's fading resonance beneath the shattered ground. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen, once a titan among men and immortal sentinel of Cadia, stood alone atop the highest tower of Casa Mirag. His armor was battered and scorched, his eyes deep pools reflecting the shattered stars overhead. The cost had been unimaginable. Countless lives lost, the fortress broken, the warp itself wounded. But the war was not over. Though Cadia had fallen, the heart of its legacy beat still. From the ashes, whispers grew, rumors of survivors, of scattered factions rallying in the dark to preserve what little hope remained for the Imperium. Alaric's mind wandered to those he had loved and lost, the comrades who had bled beside him, the betrayals that had scarred his soul. Immortality was not a blessing, he had come to understand, but a curse. To endure while the world fell apart around him was a torment few could bear. He reached beneath his cloak, retrieving a small weathered relic, a fragment of the Emperor's own light, said to shield the bearer from the darkest shadows. It was a reminder and a burden. As he prepared to leave the ruins, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure cloaked and wary, emerging from the shadows. "Lord Castellan," the figure whispered, "the fight is not finished. Others gather beyond the shattered stars. We can rebuild. We can rise again." Alaric's gaze hardened, the weight of centuries folding into resolve. Then we shall meet this darkness as we always have, head on, with fire in our hearts and steel in our hands. Together, they vanished into the night, shadows among shadows, carriers of a fragile hope. The stars above Cadia faded into a cold silence, but somewhere deep in the void, a new legend was beginning to stir, a story of loss, of betrayal, and the unyielding spirit of those who refused to surrender. The stars above the shattered remnants of Cadia hung cold and distant, indifferent to the suffering below. Yet amidst the ruins, a flicker of defiance burned quietly, a gathering of souls, scarred but unbroken, determined to carry the legacy of a fallen world. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen moved through the shadowed forests beyond the ruined fortress, the weight of immortality pressing upon him like an iron shroud. Beside him walked the cloaked figure who had spoken of hope, a former officer named Lysara, whose fierce spirit rekindled a spark he thought long extinguished. "We cannot undo the past," Lysara said softly, eyes scanning the dark horizon. "But we can forge a future from its ashes." Alaric's voice was weary, yet resolute. "The enemy believes Cadia's fall means the end of hope. They are wrong. Our fight is eternal." Their band grew as they traveled, deserters, survivors, and those who had never surrendered their loyalty to the Imperium's fading command. They shared tales of betrayal, sacrifice, and visions of a galaxy torn apart by war and shadow. Yet beneath their shared purpose, Alaric sensed the fragile threads of trust fraying. Immortality bore heavily on all of them, the endless passage of time a torment that tested even the strongest bonds. One night, beneath a sky swirled with dying stars, Alaric confided his fears. "I have seen generations fall, friends turn to dust, and empires crumble. What is left for those who outlive all hope?" Lysara's gaze was steady. "The strength to endure, to rise again, no matter how many times we fall." Their journey led them to the ruins of an ancient outpost, where whispers told of forbidden technologies, remnants of an age when man dared to challenge the gods themselves. Here lay the seeds of redemption or ruin. As they prepared to delve into the forgotten depths, Alaric understood that the true battle was not only against the darkness without, but the shadows within. The choices they made here would echo through eternity. The legacy of Cadia was not yet written. Its final chapter remained unwritten, waiting for those brave enough to seize the pen. The ancient outpost lay half buried beneath layers of dust and silence, a relic of forgotten wars and lost ambitions. Its walls, cracked and weathered, whispered secrets only the brave or the desperate would dare uncover. Lord Castellan Alaric Valen stood before the heavy archway leading into its depths, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. Beside him, Lysara's eyes gleamed with a mixture of hope and caution. "We are treading on sacred ground," she warned. "What we find here could save us, or doom us all." Alaric nodded, his mind a tumult of memories and doubts. Immortality had taught him many things: the cruelty of time, the inevitability of loss, and the burdens of choice. But it had not prepared him for this moment, where the fate of countless souls rested on a knife's edge. The air inside the outpost was stale, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten power. Ancient machines hummed faintly, their circuits flickering like dying stars. Symbols etched in a language older than humanity glowed faintly on walls lined with cryptic glyphs. As they delved deeper, they uncovered a chamber dominated by a vast device, the heart of Catan, an arcane engine said to manipulate the very fabric of reality. Legend claimed it was the last hope against the encroaching darkness, capable of severing the ties between the material realm and the warp's malevolence. But such power demanded a sacrifice. Alaric's heart tightened as he understood the cost. To activate the heart of Catan required a soul bound to immortality, a living conduit to channel its cataclysmic energies. To wield such power was to embrace an existence of endless torment, bound forever between life and death. Lysara's voice broke the heavy silence. "The burden will fall to one of us. Are you prepared to bear it?" Alaric looked at the faces of those who had followed him through fire and betrayal. Their hopes rested on him. His answer was clear, though the weight of it threatened to shatter his spirit. "I will carry the burden. If it means a chance for salvation, then I will endure whatever fate demands." As the ritual began, shadows gathered, and the air crackled with energy. The line between reality and the warp blurred, and Alaric's immortal soul stretched thin, pulled in every direction by forces beyond comprehension. The sacrifice was both physical and spiritual, a trial that tore at the very essence of his being. Pain, beyond description, seared through him, but beneath the agony lay a grim resolve. For Cadia, for humanity, for a future still worth fighting for. As the heart of Catan awakened, the sky shattered with a light that was both radiant and terrifying. The war between light and shadow reached a crescendo, and Alaric stood at the epicenter, a martyr bound by duty, sacrifice, and an unyielding will. The outcome remained uncertain, but one truth was clear. The fate of countless worlds hinged on the choices of one immortal man. The heart of Catan pulsed with an otherworldly light, its radiance both beautiful and terrible. The chamber trembled beneath the weight of unleashed energies, as if the very fabric of reality strained against the mortal hands that sought to command it. Lord Castellan Alaric Valan, bound by the ritual and the sacrifice he had willingly embraced, stood as the conduit between worlds, his immortal soul stretched taut across dimensions. Around him, his followers watched in silence, faces pale with awe and fear. The fate of Cadia, and perhaps all of humanity, rested upon this fragile moment. The ancient machine's power surged through Alaric, tearing at his essence, weaving him into the very warp he sought to sever. Yet as the ritual reached its zenith, the cost of such power revealed itself in cruel clarity. Shadows twisted in the corners of the chamber, dark echoes of the warp's malevolence seeking to claim the sacrifice's soul. The air thickened with whispers, voices that promised salvation but delivered despair. Alaric's mind became a battleground, memories of betrayal and loss clashing with the searing pain of transcendence. Visions of Voska's treachery, of comrades fallen, and of a future drowned in shadow flared like burning embers. The immortal man grappled with the abyss within, fighting to maintain his grip on reality. His voice, ragged but resolute, echoed through the chamber. "I will not yield. Not now. Not ever." The ritual's light flared, pushing back the encroaching darkness, but the victory was fleeting. The strain was immense, each moment edging Alaric closer to the precipice of oblivion. In that critical instant, Lysara stepped forward, her eyes shining with fierce determination. "You carry us all, Castellan, but no one should bear this burden alone." She placed her hand upon the machine's controls, joining her will to Alaric's. A surge of energy rippled through the chamber, stabilizing the heart of Catan, but fracturing their souls in ways neither could foresee. Together, they formed a bond, a shared sacrifice binding mortal and immortal, light and shadow. But the warp does not forgive. As the ritual concluded, a terrible price was exacted. The chamber walls cracked and splintered, the veil between realms thinning dangerously. The forces they sought to banish recoiled, but not without leaving wounds that would bleed for centuries. Alaric collapsed, his form flickering between existence and oblivion. Lysara caught him, her own strength waning but unbroken. "We have bought time," she whispered, "but the war is far from over." Outside, the first rays of a broken dawn pierced the storm-ravaged skies of Cadia. The fortress might stand a little longer, but the shadows still lingered, silent, patient, waiting. In the hearts of those who survived, the echoes of sacrifice and betrayal resounded. The immortal Castellan and the mortal warrior had kindled a fragile hope, but at a cost that none could yet measure. The war for Cadia's soul was not finished. The final battle loomed, where choices would carve the fate of empires, and the echoes of those choices would be felt for millennia. The final dawn over Cadia was not a blaze of glory, but a quiet, sorrowful twilight. The skies, torn and bleeding with the remnants of warp storms, hung heavy with the weight of countless sacrifices. The fortress that had stood for millennia now crumbled, a monument to resilience and tragedy alike. Lord Castellan Alaric Valan, the eternal sentinel burdened with endless memory, stood amidst the ruins, a silhouette against a dying world. His form was fractured, flickering between the realm of the living and the shadows beyond, bound by the unyielding chains of immortality and sacrifice. The price of wielding the heart of Catan was etched deep into his being. It had saved Cadia from immediate destruction, but at the cost of unraveling the very fabric of reality around them. The rift between materium and immaterium widened, the boundary thinning like fragile glass. Beside him, Lysara, her mortal life stretched thin by the shared burden, fell into a final, exhausted rest. Her sacrifice was a light that would burn briefly, yet brilliantly, in the encroaching darkness. Alaric's mind wandered through the echoes of time, visions of comrades lost, the sting of betrayal, and the cruel march of destiny. Immortality, he realized, was not a gift, but a relentless sentence to bear witness to endless cycles of rise and fall, hope and despair. The ghosts of Cadia whispered in the wind, their voices a mournful choir singing of valor and loss. The fortress would fall, yes, but its spirit was eternal, an unbroken flame in the shadowed galaxy. As the last stones of Casomira gave way, Alaric reached out with what remained of his strength, a final act of defiance. His voice, barely a whisper, carried across the void. Though all falls remember, even in death, hope endures. The dying sun dipped beneath the shattered horizon, casting long shadows over a world forever changed. The war was not over, far from it, but the legacy of Cadia, forged in blood and sacrifice, would echo through eternity. The vast silence that followed, a single star burned bright, a beacon for those who would rise after, who would carry the torch into the endless night. And so ended an era marked by heartbreak, betrayal, and the unyielding courage of those who stood against the darkness.